It's cute that you think you found something our entire security team missed. My manager, Eldon, leaned back in his chair, not bothering to look at my detailed report. We have protocols for a reason, Era. Stop being paranoid and focus on your actual assignments. His dismissive wave felt like a slap. I'd spent 3 weeks documenting the authentication gateway vulnerability, a flaw so obvious it made my skin crawl thinking about the millions of users it put at risk. But I started. Eldon cut me off with a tight smile. This meeting is over. And please, don't email the director again. You're making our team look disorganized. As I walked out, his words followed me. Some women in tech try to make splashes instead of being team players. 6 weeks later, when 43 million user accounts were compromised exactly as I'd predicted, I watched Eldon's face drain of color as the CEO demanded to know who was responsible. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something critical. This isn't just a story about being right when everyone thought I was wrong. This is about what happens when people with power decide that your voice doesn't matter, and the precise, calculated way I made sure they would never silence me again. My name is Ira Eason, and until 6 months ago, I was a mid-level security analyst at one of the world's largest financial technology platforms. We process transactions for 200 million users across 31 countries. I have 3 degrees in computer science and cryptography, speak 4 programming languages, and discovered my first major security flaw when I was 14, back when I'd hack systems just to prove I could before responsibly reporting the vulnerabilities. I joined Credix Core 3 years ago, thrilled to protect real people from digital threats. My interview with the Chief Security Officer, Vivian Tang, had been electric. 2 women discussing zero-day exploits and quantum encryption, while male executives tried to follow along. Vivian hired me personally, calling me exactly what our security culture needs. But Vivian left 8 months after I started. The board replaced her with Gilbert Hoffman, who brought in his trusted lieutenants from his previous company, including Eldon Reeves, my new direct manager. The problem started immediately. When Gilbert restructured the department, women and minorities were systematically moved away from core security functions. My proactive threat analysis projects were canceled. Instead, I was assigned to routine compliance documentation, essentially a glorified checkbox ticker. We need someone detail-oriented for this critical role, Eldon explained during my reassignment meeting. The subtext was clear. Stay quiet and stay in your lane. I did the compliance work flawlessly while continuing my threat analysis after hours. That's how I discovered the authentication gateway vulnerability, a subtle implementation error that allowed session tokens to be intercepted during the refresh cycle. The first time I brought it to Eldon's attention, he seemed confused by the technical details. "You're saying there's a gap during token regeneration?" he asked, struggling with the concept. Yes. For approximately 320 milliseconds, the system accepts both the old and new tokens to prevent user disconnection, but the validation sequence doesn't properly check for duplicate usage. Someone could clone a token during that window and gain persistent access. Eldon's eyes glazed over. "Have you tested this against our standard security matrix?" "That's the problem. Our standard tests don't catch it because they don't simulate rapid parallel authentication attempts." He closed my report. "Then it's theoretical. We don't chase ghosts, Era." I wasn't deterred. I documented everything meticulously and emailed it to Eldon, copying our director, Weston. Neither responded. I sent follow-up emails. Nothing. I refined my analysis, created a harmless proof-of-concept demonstration, and requested an urgent meeting. Eldon finally replied, "Your continued fixation on this non-issue is becoming disruptive. The system passes all required security certifications." During a team meeting, I tried raising the concern publicly. Eldon interrupted me mid-sentence. "Era has some interesting theories about authentication," he said with a condescending smile. "But we need to focus on real priorities. Moving on." I approached Weston directly after the meeting. He sighed deeply before I even spoke. "Look, Era, Eldon mentioned you're having trouble adjusting to our security philosophy. Not every potential vulnerability needs escalation. That's why we have risk assessment frameworks. But this doesn't fit the framework parameters because..." Because it's not a standard attack vector, I know. He finished for me. That's precisely why we prioritize known threats. The exotic scenarios you're imagining make for great conference talks, but we're running a business. It's not exotic. I can demonstrate it right now. That won't be necessary, Weston said firmly. Focus on your compliance documentation. That's where we need your talents. Each rejection hardened my resolve. I documented everything. Every email, every dismissed warning, every condescending response. 32 separate communications over 6 weeks, each more urgent than the last. I kept copies on secure personal storage, outside company systems. My colleagues began avoiding me. Conversations stopped when I entered the break room. I overheard Eldon telling another manager I was too emotional about theoretical edge cases. But something inside me refused to accept defeat. Late one night, 3 weeks after my initial discovery, I created what I called Project Cassandra, named after the Greek prophetess cursed to speak true prophecies that no one would believe. Project Cassandra was a shadow monitoring system that ran on a separate virtual partition within our network, invisible to standard admin tools but completely legitimate under my security testing authorization. It didn't modify any production systems. It simply observed and recorded authentication patterns, looking specifically for the signature of the vulnerability I'd identified. I worked on it during lunch breaks and after hours, meticulously ensuring it couldn't disrupt normal operations. The system would document exploitation attempts without alerting anyone, creating an unimpeachable record if the attack I feared ever materialized. Meanwhile, the dismissals continued. In my 5th week of warnings, I found a sticky note on my monitor. Team meeting, your presence requested. The unusual formality made my stomach tighten. Eldon and Weston were waiting with Harriet from Human Resources. Era, Weston began with practiced concern. We're worried about your integration with the team. There have been reports of disruptive behavior. Disruptive? I echoed. You mean the security vulnerability reports? Harriet interjected smoothly. Several colleagues have expressed concern about your communication style. Apparently, you've continued raising the same issue repeatedly, despite clear direction. Because it's a critical security flaw that remains unaddressed, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. Eldon cleared his throat. Era, with respect, you've become somewhat fixated. Perhaps it's the pressure of the compliance role. This has nothing to do with pressure. The vulnerability is real, and I've demonstrated it 3 different ways. Weston leaned forward. The head of IT reviewed your reports and suggested you might be better suited for another department. Perhaps application support, where your attention to detail would be valuable without the security pressures. The implication was crystal clear: stop pushing or be transferred. I felt heat rising in my neck but maintained my composure. I understand your position, I said carefully. I'll focus on my assigned duties. They seemed relieved by my apparent surrender. I returned to my desk and appeared to concentrate on compliance reports. In reality, I was putting the finishing touches on Project Cassandra. 1 week later, it happened exactly as I'd predicted. The first sign was an unusual spike in authentication token refreshes, subtle enough that standard monitoring missed it, but my shadow system captured every detail. Over the next 3 days, the attackers moved laterally through our systems, harvesting user data while staying below detection thresholds. On Monday morning, I received an automated alert from Project Cassandra. Exploitation pattern confirmed, 85% confidence. I immediately emailed Eldon, Weston, and the Security Operations Center with the evidence. No response. Tuesday, exploitation, pattern confirmed, 97% confidence. I sent another urgent email with more details. Nothing. Wednesday morning, the company discovered the breach, but only because customers reported unauthorized transactions. By then, the attackers had already extracted 43 million user records and financial details. The company went into crisis mode. Emergency response teams were activated. The stock price dropped 18% in pre-market trading. The CEO, Adriana Nemeth, declared a Level 1 security emergency, the first in company history. An all-hands emergency meeting was called in the main conference room. Everyone from director level up was required to attend. I wasn't invited, but I went anyway. The room was thick with tension when I slipped in at the back. Adriana stood at the front, her expression thunderous. "How did this happen?" she demanded. "We invested 40 million in security infrastructure last year alone." Gilbert, the CSO, looked ashen. "We're still investigating the attack vector, but it appears to be a sophisticated state-sponsored." "It wasn't sophisticated," I said, my voice cutting through the room. Every head turned toward me. It was a basic authentication token interception during the refresh cycle. The vulnerability has existed for at least 6 weeks. Adriana's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Era Isan, security analyst. I identified this vulnerability 6 weeks ago and have been reporting it ever since." The silence that followed was absolute. I opened my laptop, connected to the room's presentation system, and displayed my first warning email dated exactly 6 weeks earlier. Then I forwarded all 32 documented warnings to Adriana's tablet. "What is this?" she asked, scrolling through the emails. "Every report, analysis, and warning I've sent about this specific vulnerability. You'll notice they were all either ignored or dismissed. If you're enjoying this story of corporate betrayal so far, you'll want to stay until the end, because what happened next transformed not just my career, but the entire security landscape of the company. And trust me, the revenge I took wasn't just about getting even. It was about creating a reckoning that no one in that room would ever forget." Adriana's expression shifted from confusion to cold fury as she continued scrolling through my emails. "Gilbert, Weston, Eldon, did you see these warnings?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Eldon recovered first. "With respect, Adriana, those reports were reviewed and deemed speculative. ERA has a history of raising theoretical concerns without sufficient—" "Theoretical?" I interrupted, pulling up Project Cassandra on the screen. "This is my shadow monitoring system that has been tracking the exploitation of this theoretical vulnerability in real time for the past 3 days. The data visualization showed precisely how the attackers had moved through our systems, each entry point, each lateral movement, each data extraction. The evidence was irrefutable." "You built this monitoring system without authorization?" Gilbert asked, attempting to shift focus. "I built it using my assigned security testing authorization after my official reports were ignored." I corrected. "Everything was done according to company policy, which I've documented here." I displayed the relevant policy sections highlighting my authority to conduct security tests. Adriana cut through the tension. "Can this be stopped?" "Yes," I said confidently. "I've already prepared the solution. I can implement it immediately." "Do it," she ordered. Within 30 minutes, I was authorized to deploy my patch. I moved to a security operations terminal, aware of every eye in the room watching me. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I initiated the countermeasures I'd prepared weeks ago. "The patch is targeting the authentication token validation sequence," I explained as I worked. "It's closing the millisecond gap during refresh cycles and implementing parallel session detection." The room remained silent except for the quiet tapping of my keyboard. The tension was palpable as executives who had never given me a second glance now watched my every move. "First phase complete," I announced after 12 minutes. "The vulnerability is patched, now implementing detection routines to identify compromised accounts." Adriana stepped closer to my terminal. "How bad is the damage?" I displayed the preliminary assessment on the main screen. 43.2 million user accounts compromised. Financial data, personal information, transaction histories, all exposed. The attackers had continuous access for approximately 76 hours. A collective groan filled the room. Our chief financial officer turned ashen. "But," I continued, "I've identified the exfiltration patterns. The attackers were methodical. They extracted data in specific batches through proxy servers. We can trace the flow patterns and potentially recover some data before it's distributed." "Do it," Adriana commanded. For the next 4 hours, I led an emergency response that should have been orchestrated by the very people who had ignored my warnings. The boardroom transformed into a crisis center, with executives bringing me information rather than the other way around. Eldon attempted to insert himself several times, but his technical questions revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the systems he supposedly oversaw. By midnight, we had contained the breach, identified all compromised accounts, and initiated the required security notifications. The damage was severe but not catastrophic, thanks not to our security systems, but to Project Cassandra's early detection. As the crisis team dispersed around 2 a.m., Adriana pulled me aside. "I need to understand exactly what happened here," she said, exhaustion evident in her voice. "Not just the technical failure, but the organizational one. Can you prepare a comprehensive briefing for tomorrow morning? Just you, me, and the board." "Yes," I replied simply. Eldon overheard and approached us. "As the security manager, I should be present for that discussion," he interjected. Adriana fixed him with an icy stare. "You'll have your opportunity to explain, Eldon." Separately, I went home for 3 hours of restless sleep before returning to prepare my presentation. I decided against PowerPoint slides or technical jargon. Instead, I organized a simple timeline: my discovery, each warning, each dismissal, and the final breach. The evidence would speak for itself. At 9 a.m. sharp, I entered the executive boardroom. Adriana sat at the head of the table, surrounded by 9 board members. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to open hostility. "Miss Eason," Adriana began, "please help us understand what went wrong and how we can prevent it from happening again." I connected my laptop to the display system and pulled up my timeline. 6 weeks ago, I identified a critical vulnerability in our authentication system. I began. "Rather than tell you what happened next, I'll show you." I played the recordings I'd made of my meetings with Eldon and Weston. The dismissive tone, the condescension, the subtle and not so subtle attempts to silence me, all captured in high-definition audio and video. "You recorded private conversations?" one board member asked, frowning. Credix Core Security Policy Section 18.4 requires all security analysts to document all discussions related to potential vulnerabilities. I replied, displaying the relevant policy. I followed protocol. I continued through the timeline, showing email exchanges, meeting notes, and finally, the data from Project Cassandra that proved I could have prevented the entire breach if anyone had listened. "The technical failure is simple to fix," I concluded. "I've already implemented the solution. The organizational failure is more complex." "What do you mean by organizational failure?" asked Benita, the longest-serving board member. "During my investigation of the vulnerability, I discovered something more troubling than the security flaw itself." I took a deep breath. "Our entire security response infrastructure exists largely on paper." I displayed a new set of data, this time focusing on our emergency response systems. For the past 2 years, our quarterly security drills have reported perfect response metrics. Incident detection time, 47 seconds. Team assembly, 3 minutes. Threat containment, 12 minutes. These numbers haven't varied by more than 5% in 8 consecutive drills. The board members nodded, apparently pleased with these statistics. "The problem," I continued, "is that these results are statistically impossible. No human response team achieves such consistent metrics across different threat scenarios." So I looked deeper. I displayed the actual system logs from our last 4 security drills. These logs show that during our supposed drills, critical security systems were never actually activated. The emergency response team never assembled. Containment protocols were never initiated. The reports were fabricated. The room erupted in confusion and anger. "That's impossible," Gilbert protested. "I personally oversaw those drills." "Yes, you did," I agreed, pulling up another document. "And according to the executive compensation plan, you and your direct reports received performance bonuses totaling 4.3 million based partly on those drill results." Adriana's expression had transformed from concern to cold fury. "Are you suggesting our security team falsified emergency response data for financial gain?" "I'm not suggesting it," I replied calmly. "I'm proving it." I displayed communication logs between Gilbert, Eldon, and 4 other senior security managers discussing how to streamline the drill reporting process. "We don't need to waste resources on full-scale drills when we know our systems work," Gilbert had written. Just use last quarter's numbers with minor adjustments. The boardroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Credix Core hadn't just ignored a security warning. It had been systematically deceived about its ability to respond to crises. When the real breach happened, I explained, our response was chaotic precisely because we never actually practiced. The systems existed on paper, but the human elements, the most critical components, were completely untested. Adriana leaned forward. What do you recommend? I closed my laptop. A complete restructuring of security operations with independent oversight, separation of assessment and response teams, and a cultural shift that values security concerns regardless of who raises them. What followed was 3 hours of intense questioning. Board members demanded specifics about who knew what and when. They calculated potential legal liabilities. They debated customer notification strategies. Throughout it all, I remained calm and precise. This wasn't about my vindication anymore. It was about fixing a fundamentally broken system. Around noon, Adriana called for a break. As the board members filed out, she asked me to stay. You've been remarkably composed through all this, she observed when we were alone. I met her gaze directly. I've had 6 weeks to process my anger. What do you want, Era? A promotion? Your own team? I considered the question carefully. I want to rebuild our security culture from the ground up. That means structural changes, not just new titles or reporting lines. Adriana nodded slowly. The board is discussing an independent security division that reports directly to them, not through Gilbert or the technology branch. Would that interest you? Potentially, I acknowledged, but only with real authority and resources. You'd have both, she promised. We can't afford another breach like this. When the meeting reconvened, the board had reached several decisions. Gilbert, Eldon, and Weston were placed on immediate administrative leave pending further investigation. An independent audit of all security operations was authorized. And most significantly, a new security integrity division would be established, reporting directly to the board. Ms. Essen, Adriana announced, we'd like you to lead this division, effective immediately. I accepted with a single nod. The following weeks were intense. The public relations team worked overtime to manage the fallout from the breach. Customers were outraged, regulators launched investigations, and our stock continued to drop. I assembled a team of security specialists I trusted, many from outside the company, and began rebuilding our entire security infrastructure. We implemented true checks and balances, transparent reporting mechanisms, and most importantly, an anonymous vulnerability disclosure program that protected those who raised concerns. The changes weren't merely technical. I insisted on cultural transformation. Every executive, from Adriana down, participated in security awareness training. We established a security-first mentality where protective measures weren't seen as obstacles to business but as essential foundations. 1 month after the breach, the external investigation confirmed everything I had uncovered and more. Gilbert and his inner circle had systematically dismantled actual security protocols while creating elaborate paperwork to suggest everything was functioning perfectly. Their motivation wasn't just bonuses. They'd been cutting corners to reduce costs and increase their departmental profit margins, which directly affected their performance evaluations. The legal consequences were swift. Gilbert and 3 others faced criminal charges for securities fraud. Eldon avoided prosecution, but was terminated for gross negligence. Several board members resigned for failure of oversight. Through it all, I maintained meticulous documentation of every decision, every change, every improvement. Credix Core would never again suffer from institutional memory loss about its security practices. 3 months after the breach, we'd implemented a completely revamped security system. Customer trust was slowly rebuilding. The stock price had recovered about half its losses. And my security integrity division had become a model that other companies in our industry began to emulate. But my revenge, my true revenge, came in a form I hadn't anticipated. It happened on a Monday morning, 6 months after the initial breach. I arrived at my office to find a familiar face waiting outside my door, Eldon. He looked different, older, somehow smaller. His designer suit had been replaced by something off the rack. The confident smirk was gone. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, his voice lacking its former condescension. I unlocked my office door and gestured for him to enter. The spacious corner office, formerly Gilbert's, offered a view of the city skyline. I took my seat behind the desk while Eldon perched awkwardly on a visitor chair. "I'm surprised to see you here," I said neutrally. He placed a folder on my desk. "I've been consulting for Brightline Financial. Their CISO asked me to deliver the security assessment personally." I raised an eyebrow. "Brightline is one of our partners. Why would they hire you after what happened here?" Eldon's expression tightened. "They didn't know my history. I used a different name." He paused. "But someone sent them the full report on the Credix Core breach yesterday. They've terminated my contract and demanded I retrieve all materials immediately." "That's unfortunate," I said, making no effort to hide my lack of sympathy. "Was it you?" he asked. "Did you send them the report?" I leaned back in my chair. "The report is public record, Eldon. Anyone could have sent it." He stared at me, trying to read my expression. I offered nothing. "I can't get work in this industry anymore," he said quietly. "Every potential employer eventually discovers what happened here." "Actions have consequences," I replied. 6 weeks of ignored warnings, 43 million compromised accounts, billions in company losses. "I made a mistake," he admitted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I should have listened to you." "Yes, you should have." Eldon leaned forward. "I need a job, Era. Any position. I have experience. I've learned my lesson." I studied him for a long moment. "Actually, we do have an opening." Hope flickered across his face. "Anything. I'll take anything." "We've established a new compliance documentation team. Entry-level position. They review security protocols and ensure all procedures are properly documented." "That's perfect," he said, trying to mask his disappointment at the junior role. "When can I start?" I opened my desk drawer and removed a folder containing employment paperwork. "Immediately. But there's one condition." "Name it." "You'll be reporting directly to me. Every Monday morning, you'll personally deliver a detailed compliance report. I'll review it with the same attention to detail that you should have given my warnings." The implication was clear. Our roles were now completely reversed. The man who had dismissed me as paranoid would now depend on my approval for his professional survival. Eldon swallowed hard. "I understand." "Do you?" I asked, my voice level. "Because I want to be extremely clear. This isn't about humiliating you, Eldon. It's about accountability. About creating a system where concerns are heard regardless of who raises them." He nodded slowly. "I deserve this." "It's not about what you deserve." I corrected him. "It's about what our users deserve. They trust us with their financial data, their personal information. That trust must be sacred to everyone who works here." I pushed the employment contract across the desk. "Your first assignment will be documenting our new vulnerability response protocol, the one that ensures no warning goes unheeded, regardless of who raises it." Eldon signed the contract with a shaking hand. As he did, I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, only the satisfaction of a system properly rebalanced. "Report to HR after this," I instructed. "They'll get you set up." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." "Prove it through your work," I replied. "Actions, not words." After he left, I turned to look out the window at the city below. My revenge wasn't getting Eldon fired or humiliated. It wasn't even my promotion or the creation of my division. My revenge was transforming the entire security culture of a global financial company, creating systems where no voice could be silenced, ensuring that what happened to me couldn't happen to anyone else. Every Monday morning since then, Eldon delivers his compliance report. And every Monday, I remind him, security isn't about fear or paranoia. It's about respect for our users, our systems, and every voice that speaks up to protect them. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment about a time when your warnings or concerns were dismissed, and what happened afterward. Did you find a way to be heard? How did you handle the situation? Your experiences might help others facing similar challenges. And if you want more stories about standing your ground when everyone else thinks you're wrong, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Because sometimes being called paranoid just means you're seeing dangers that others refuse to acknowledge.